what really strikes me in that is that it wasn't even just about, oh, Kevin's doing XYZ, he's believing XYZ. It's literally not an openness to your religious experience itself. Like that there's this point of like, oh, he said he had the same experience with the Quran that he did with the Bible. That can't be true.
Right.
Literally just not listening
Yeah.
to a spiritual account of what you experienced. Now, they might have a different interpretation than you did of what was happening in that moment, but it sounds like the experience itself upset them.
Yeah.
Which is not the posture that you could ever begin to practice a mutuality of really believing that someone else has a genuine religious experience or spiritual experience that they're describing.
Yeah.
And if you're shut down to that, you're shut down to other people, and you're shut down to what it means to be human and spiritual.
Yeah, that's great insight. Maybe that's why mutualism became such an important idea to me.
Probably.
Welcome to the Embracing Mystery podcast. Join us as we explore together ways that we can embrace creative and spiritual mystery in our lives and simultaneously find ourselves embraced in the mystery of compassionate, creative interconnection, held by what may be called the divine or source or consciousness or even mystery itself. In the process, we seek to become more fully ourselves, find our home and places of belonging, and grow as creative, spiritual, and relational beings. Well, welcome to this episode of Embracing Mystery. And today we're going to be discussing, I think, a really, really interesting topic related in general to the question of our own journeys with mystery, including our levels of comfort and discomfort and certainty and uncertainty and new questions and experiences. And as we do that, we're going to encounter several big questions that we hope to touch on today. One of those being going back even to our own childhood and early religious experiences, if we had those, but early childhood, later experiences, etc., and how those were affected us, both in positive and perhaps difficult ways. We're going to be reflecting on experiences we may have had along the way of what we might call disruption, new questions, uncertainties, things that we just couldn't accept anymore, new pieces of information that caused us to see things in a new way. And then we're also hoping to land, if we time permitting, on how we currently see things and where we are as of today, knowing fully well that may not be where we were yesterday and may well not be where we are tomorrow. One of the postures that we want to bring to this is something we call mutualism. We are an interspiritual community in the Table Collective, which means we're also a collection, we hope, of interspiritual individuals. And what we mean by that is really captured in this idea of mutualism, in which we really want to foster the approach that while valuing and honoring our own journeys and heritages, sees the value and benefit of those with other heritages and the other heritages themselves and other traditions and backgrounds and experiences, not just from a position of respect, but from actually intentionally pursuing and welcoming fresh insights, to receive fresh things, that there's things of value there, not just to say, oh, that's good, kind of from a distance, but to actually welcome into our own beings, even if those can be disruptive, as we'll talk about a bit later today. But also to come to it with the idea that if I'm eager to receive and open to receiving and being transformed and changed by what I receive, I also want to offer transparently and openly whatever I may have as well. So that's the posture that we want to enter really everything we do with, how we listen to and receive each other's artistic and creative expressions, as well as how we listen to and experience one another's spiritual essence and journey, as we will do some of today. So before launching into that, as we are in the habit of doing, we'll pause for a few moments. Very simple today. We'll just take a few deep breaths. I encourage all of you who might be listening or watching to do the same. And as we're attentive to breathing in and out, it seems a very appropriate physical metaphor for the inner posture that we want to cultivate of breathing in and breathing out, taking in and receiving, and being willing to give out and to share. So let's take 3 more breaths with that in mind. Okay. With that, I'm going to launch us into our first set of questions. And I'm just going to read what we've put down here. You don't, as you know, you've participated in these conversations a lot. We don't have to answer each one in order. We can, they're going to spin other questions as well. But relative to this whole idea of reflecting on our upbringing, how might the comfort levels or lack of comfort with mystery on the part of our families or our religious communities have shaped our own comfort level or lack of it? Looking back, what sort of personal tendencies do we notice in ourselves, which might have been instinctively different from that of our family and community, relative to, say, curiosity or the desire for certainty? A comfort with a lack of clarity, uncertainty, openness to, or even eagerness for searching and seeking more. So I just want to give us an opportunity to reflect on those things in our own upbringing, either early on or later in our life. And so I will throw it open for now to my conversation partners. Naz or Stephen, anything you want to start us off with?
I'm happy to start. Yeah.
Okay.
So I grew up, I'll just start with the context I was living in. My family was open to, I'm going to direct this specifically around spirituality, but they were open to any questions I had, which is not something I can, I think I took it for granted for so long. And in my church community as well, I grew up Christian in a more progressive mainline denomination. And I had as much space as I wanted to ask whatever I wanted. And then I met evangelical people and I was like, oh, you didn't have the same experience. Okay. I didn't realize how valuable that was in my formation and just being me and not being stunted or held back. But at the same time, I think as a person, so setting all of that aside, I think just woven into my personality, maybe some things in my family dynamics as well. But I did not do well with uncertainty. And on 2 different levels. One level of like, I liked to know things as a way of having a sense of security. I'm sure I argued with people. I know I did in college because I was like the liberal kid among a bunch of conservatives. I went to a Christian environment and found out that I was not like all of them, at least to start. Anyways, but I wanted to have my head wrapped around everything. And so just in terms of mystery in general, I was like, no, I'm going to try to have an answer for every issue and an answer for everything, figure out what's going on in the world, as well as how I understood my faith at the time. But at least I had the space where I felt comfortable doing that. I didn't have boundaries of like, you can't go look at these other things. So my favorite class in high school was actually a religions class. It was humanities, but it was focused on world religions was a major portion of that.
Right.
And so I became a religion major instead of like a Christian ministries major. And I don't think that was an accident looking back. Like it makes sense for me. And it wasn't with the intention of like arguing with them either. It wasn't with the intention of creating theological defenses or something. It was out of pure curiosity and receiving from them. So I look back at that part and appreciate it. But then I look at the other part of how I approached uncertainty, and that was I wanted to be sure that every decision I made was safe. And so where my sense of connecting with mystery, as I understood, and I would use the language of God, particularly as like the heart language I grew up with, I wanted to be like, oh, this is it. And so that way I know that it's at least for my good if something bad happens or it's hard, and the worst case scenario won't happen to me. Obviously, worst case scenarios happen to people all the time.
Right.
But I was using it as a way of getting security and control and not dealing with maybe the problem of suffering and evil that is inherent in that. But it happened to work for me for a while until it didn't. So.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for bringing that, the sort of cognitive and intellectual side into the conversation, but you also went to the psychological and emotional aspects as well. And I appreciate that, because that is all part of the mix that we'll be talking about today. So thanks for teeing that up as well. Yeah. Naz, would you like to share your aspect of that?
Yes. Okay. So where do I begin? I feel like I've had an interesting upbringing. It's always hard to explain, so I'll try and explain it as best as I can.
Yeah, please.
So I grew up in a Bangladeshi household in New Jersey. My parents are immigrants. I grew up Bangladeshi Muslim, which carries a lot of baggage in itself already, because to be a Bangladeshi Muslim is to also acknowledge that my ancestors were probably lower caste Hindu and Buddhists.
Right.
So a lot of that is probably trickled down into our lived experiences, just not named.
Yeah.
Also in New Jersey, I grew up not just with my family, but I grew up in a very mixed religious environment, which was very normal to me. To me, I thought everyone had these types of experiences.
Not in Kansas.
Yeah, when I grew up, I was like, oh, this is not the case. So I grew up around, so we shared an apartment with an upper caste Hindu Bengali family, which I think people would not believe, like, wait a minute, upper caste Hindu, Muslim living together under the same roof. Yes, it happened.
Yeah.
And so I was around Hinduism simultaneously around Islam as well. I didn't see it as contradictory because we were surviving together, being immigrants, being poor. We had to put aside, not put aside, we had to like maybe, what's the word? Come together, collaborate, learn how to live together to survive. It was really kind of this religion of survival we were sharing.
Were your parents friends with them ahead of time?
Yes.
Okay. So there's already an established relationship across these boundaries and lines.
Yeah. And what's so interesting is what actually brought them together was not shared ethnicity. It was shared dialect.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where because there were other Bengali, Bangladeshi people around us, but they didn't feel close because there was like a difference of dialects. So with this upper caste Hindu family, dialects brought them together more than anything else. They were able to like look past religion. And my dad's friend was married to a white woman who was a Christian. So there was also that mixed into the...
In that same household, or is that someone else?
They were relatives of the people we were sharing the house with. So we celebrated Eid, we celebrated pujas, and we celebrated Christmas. Yes, I grew up in a very syncretic environment. This was so normal to me.
Right.
Awesome.
And then for me, the concept of religion didn't really exist. It wasn't super explicit. It wasn't overt. The only time it would come up would be when it came to like dietary restrictions.
Sure.
Because the family that we shared...
Or social things that...
the family that we shared our households with, again, Hindus, they don't eat beef. So my mom would be very mindful of not cooking beef when they were around.
Right.
And then I would be like, that's kind of like, why is that? And then my mom said, oh yeah, well, so-and-so is Hindu. And I was like, okay, I still didn't know what that meant though.
Right. Yeah.
I don't eat beef.
I still have my questions.
But we speak the same language. How are we all so different? So things like that. So I think my connection to mystery was a lot of confusion and questioning.
From the start.
Yeah. And also my mom, being Bangladeshi Muslims, also from lower caste, we're from like farming caste, at least my dad's side. My mom's side is a little bit, there's a long history. I can't explain it or get into it, but mostly lower class. And so there's a lot of superstition, a lot of folklore, a lot of mythology kind of blended into our worldview, especially my mother's worldview. So when I brought up existential questions, like, where did I come from? How come I'm not in the, I was looking at their wedding photos. How come I'm not here?
Right. Yeah, that's, I mean,
Where am I?
yes.
My mom would never give me, she would
you're like
answer
4.
me. She would give me answers and I would believe them, but it was like very superstitious, mythological answers.
Yeah,
I'm like, they're like, oh yeah, you were like blooming in the sky. You know, one day you just walked through the door and you
They
just
didn't want to
joined
have the talk.
family.
Yeah.
They didn't want to tell you.
Wait, that's not how it happens? Wow, this is blowing my mind. Yeah. Anyway.
So she almost cultivated this very imaginal way of engaging
Right.
with the world.
I'm curious how that shaped you by the time you were like a high schooler. So like growing up or even into early college or something, like growing up in a space like that, how'd that form who you are?
Oh yeah, that's a long story because I was also like taking religion classes and anthropology classes. So, you know, learning in anthropology, we have the concepts of etic and emic.
Yep.
So I forget which is which,
Yeah,
but like
outside etic and inside imic.
like being a practitioner from the inside.
The lived experience.
Yeah, and then being an observer for like
Yep.
yeah. So I mean, I consider myself an insider outsider to a lot of my
Sure.
identity groups. And then kind of, I don't know, it came slowly because it's like, okay, I don't know. It was just very interesting.
I'm sure.
Unpacking a lot of this mythological stuff with all the stuff I was learning in anthropology. I'm like, wait, there's reasons for this. There's like history. There's like sociology. I was learning, we don't eat pork, right? Being Muslim. I was like, okay, when I was little, I was like, okay, I don't question it. Like we just don't eat pork because it's.
We don't eat pork. They don't eat beef. No one knows why, but
then when I got into college, I took an the anthropology of religions class, and then we got into it's probably because wherever like Islam came from, like the Middle East, right? So maybe they didn't have like those animals around, or if they did, maybe it's I don't know, disease spread. So that's probably why
More
they didn't.
likely with pork. Yeah.
So there were reasons. I was like learning. I'm like, this is probably why that worldview formed.
yeah, that's actually helpful.
Yeah. But I was also trying to reconcile with all the stuff that my mom was like, well, this is just how it is.
Yeah.
Which for a questioning young kid is probably not satisfactory. You're like, well,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
But I mean, just as I commented on Stephen bringing in the psychological, emotional side, which you've also touched on, I think you brought in a couple of things that, and all of these will begin to segue us when we start talking about disruptions. I'll do my historical thing in a minute, but I think it's really interesting you talked about the imaginative, the answers to some of your childhood questions, but it kind of sparked imagination. You're a flower blooming in the sky. And I mean, I see it in some of your art, right? And it's just, to me, that's very beautiful as part of how to interpret things and respond to the questions that our heritages bring up. And then really we're going to talk about disruption in a minute, but the disruption of living together as displaced people, immigrant community. There's a sociological disruption happening. I tend to think of, in this context today, I was thinking almost exclusively of disruptions that happen because of experiences related to spirituality and religion, as opposed to those kinds of things. I think it's great that we've brought that up, because that is a feature that I think can get discounted sometimes, particularly in the West. We tend to think of religion and spirituality as this categorized box that is unaffected by our context and our locations and all that stuff. So this is already tremendous material. Thank you both. I was thinking of mine, obviously, as well, leading up to this conversation. My mother was raised Baptist in Arizona, got pregnant out of wedlock, which is not what a Baptist girl does in the 1950s. And yes, I am that old. And then got divorced as well after marrying my father. So she had moved to California, and there she is as a single mother, divorced, a kid out of wedlock. And she told me later years, I'm not going back to the Baptist church. I'm not welcome there. She ended up in an Episcopal church, which is a progressive, nowadays at least, more progressive denomination. But I didn't like it. I didn't go. I fought my mom. I didn't want to go to church at all. My first religious experience at all was watching a movie about St. Francis of Assisi, an old black and white, I'm sure very cheesy and historically inaccurate movie. And I went down to my room and I grabbed I had a King James Bible my grandmother had given me, my Baptist grandmother, which I had never read. I'd never opened it. I got that out. I put it on top of my dresser. I went up and got some Kool-Aid, put it on my dresser, and I got a piece of bread and I gave myself communion. I must have gone to church enough to see communion, right? But I didn't associate it with anything religious. It was just this attraction to this person who had some kind of spiritual juju going on, I guess. Anyway, later I had experiences within the Episcopal context, this progressive denomination, but they were in a much more sort of conservative evangelical bubble of that. And some of the things I appreciate about that was I really did develop a love for the sacred scriptures of my heritage. We'll talk about that very love of them and deep study of them led to some of my more disruptive moments later, but we'll get to disruption in a moment. But I did start to have questions, and what brought me comfort, and it ties a bit to your mention of imagination. I came across authors who were devout Christians, but were also poets and writers, and their approach to some of the questions about Scripture were like artists and poets, and they read them that way. And it freed my imagination to read things in a different way. And it gave me a greater comfort with the uncertainties and the curiosities that I had. It freed my imagination to be able to be respectful and yet not mechanical, I guess, in how I approached those things. Yeah, that's probably enough for now. I think it'll start. I'll be segueing into disruption if I go any further there. But I think we've gotten some of our history on the table. Christian background, Bengali Muslim background, but mixed environment, progressive denomination, but then in a more kind of tight bubble of that. So let's talk about disruption, and that can have all sorts of things associated with it. The disruptive experiences, insights, questions, new information, whether it's particularly, very typical for people when they hit university or something to get all kinds of questions they hadn't thought of before, but it might be something else. It could be relationships, social environment. It could be all sorts of things. And what we really want to explore here is just kind of maybe describing some of those experiences or insights or questions, how they impacted us, changed us, new questions they raised, how they helped us kind of see and understand connection with mystery or the divine, or however we were thinking about things then and now, and just kind of explore all that together here a little bit. So we don't have to go in the same order, but who would like to take a crack at disrupting us a little bit?
I can go.
Great.
One memory's coming to mind. So eventually our little mixed community, we kind of dispersed, the families. We found our own apartments. We kind of had our own spaces. And then in the year 2000, my grandfather passed away in Bangladesh. And then that was like a huge... it affected my mother greatly because she hadn't seen him since she left the country in 1994. And so she was very shaken up, and all of a sudden she turned very religious.
Okay.
It was like 180. All of a sudden she started, I'd see her pray occasionally, but this was much more...
like, did she start 5 times a day?
Yes.
Yep.
And then she had us pray. She sent us to mosque, which was not a type of culture that my sister and I were used to.
Right.
All of a sudden, everything was more about, it was very, because I know she was trying to cope with her grief.
Yeah.
Because I think it also stirred in and reminded her of her own mortality. So I think she started to say, watch your behavior, repent, don't do anything bad. Like it was very, it was so different from before. It was very confusing.
And sounds pretty sudden.
Yeah, incredibly confusing. So that went on for a few months. And that's, I don't know, it was just very like disruptive to me. And then in December of that year, we went to Bangladesh, and that was my first time going there, and then experiencing.
'Cause you'd been raised in New Jersey.
Yeah, and then experiencing more of a overt Muslim culture, but still very much Bangladeshi.
Yep. Yeah, it's its own unique thing.
Yeah. But I think my mom started to feel, being around her family, she started to like feel normal again. Because then like my cousin and my aunt was like, what is this? Like, what is this?
Like when they saw her doing so formal in her 5 times a day and all that.
Because my family's more of a mixed bag. When it comes to religion, especially the women. I don't know. It's a very interesting dynamic to see between the genders, but I won't go into that now.
Yep.
And then after we come back, into the 2001, 9/11 happens.
Okay.
That's another disruption.
Yeah.
And
in New Jersey.
Yes. And I grew up right outside New York City. So, and my last name is also Islam.
Yep.
Which has not been in my family for very long. My grandfather changed it. So it's been in the family. This was a change that happened about 2 generations ago.
Okay.
And it's related to politics that I can't get into.
Yeah.
And so, 9/11, anything that was more collectively, it brought attention to Muslims, and we had to
yes, it did.
Look at our identity very differently.
Like, hey, old neighbors or community, can we be Hindu real quick?
I know one of my friends who's Somali American, also Muslim, their family went from like being like my family, like, I hate using the word nominal because I feel like religion, there's diversity within religion, but they went from like my family to being a little bit more like, I feel like a specific type of American Islam developed at that time.
That makes sense.
I think you're on target. Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you bringing up the word nominal. I think that gets used in so many bizarre ways because it implies a level. It implies something about the heart, not just the practice, right? And I think the brief year or so I lived in Bangladesh, what I saw was quite a few Bengalis who weren't practicing very strictly, but they were very devout. I would never call them nominal in that dismissive kind of sense. But I'm glad you brought that up. And that applies to all kinds of religious heritages and traditions.
Using my religion degree.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, thank you. And I think too, and very interesting in this, that typically we think of, I don't know, when I say we, who's we, right? The royal we. I think oftentimes disruption in the religious context it's assumed by most people that that's something that disrupted a more traditional religious approach, right? And raised questions about our traditional thing. Whereas for you, it was very much the opposite. It was like this incursion of much more traditional religious practice was a disruptive event in your life. So I just think it's important to note it can go multiple directions, right?
And there's the deconstruction understanding of it, but then this is having more put in your face than you're used to.
Yeah.
I also then noticed being in more, I think my family started to get more involved into mainstream American Muslim spaces, which has a specific type of identity.
Yep.
In all, I don't want to lump all the spaces and say they're the same, but the experience I had in those spaces in a very specific place and time was that it seemed very assimilationist. It seemed like they were trying to mimic Christian
practices and approaches. And even evangelistic methods in many cases. I don't know if that was the experience of your community, but in many ways that I've seen that as well. Thank you.
I'm curious how that experience, like, how did you find yourself responding to that over time of seeing your family go into a much more traditional religious expression of Islam?
Well, being in those spaces, our family was also approached and we were told, you're not practicing right. You need to practice right. So I was very conflicted. I'm like, what do you mean we're not practicing right? So I'm trying to learn like the right way to do religion.
Right. Because how old were you at this point, probably, if it's okay to ask?
Like 10, between 10 to like
so
17.
Like, yeah. Wow. That is okay if I go second then, and that'll just break up our order fully this time. So for me, and I hinted at this earlier, I think for me there's two kinds of disruptive experiences that I can look back on, and one, as I mentioned, came from within the tradition itself. So the more I dug into the Bible and the scriptures, the more questions I began to have about, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, or that doesn't make sense. And it's not that there aren't reasoned, rational answers for that. If there are Christians listening to this, I don't want them thinking, oh, Kevin just didn't meet the right people. They could have really helped him out. I did, and I studied it a lot. And but there were questions that there were quote unquote right answers within the community, like that kept you accepted. If you said, oh, this is the answer to the creation accounts, this is the answer to the violence of the Old Testament, and if we weren't religious people, we would read the Old Testament and say, wait, that was genocide, right? There's rational answers for that, and here's how to explain it. But those right answers that kept you safe in the community just didn't satisfy anymore. And that was, so there's disruption coming from within, right? But then the other set of what I think most would call disruptive experiences began for me as very beautiful things. As I was living, and actually one of them happened while living in Bangladesh. I had, during a time living in Pakistan, I had been studying the Quran really carefully, and I continued that in Bangladesh. And one night I had this experience as I was reading through the Quran that it was very much the kind of experience I had had several times in my Christian context of an encounter, what I would call an encounter with the divine or mystery. And it was very powerful and very intimate and very real to me. And it was in the context of Quranic meditation and forms of meditation that I had learned there. And but for me, it was very beautiful, and it didn't disrupt me. I welcomed it. The disruption came, and this is just one example of several, and I don't have to go into all of them because they're similar. The disruption came when I was talking to Christian friends. And hey, this happened. And I just thought, because to me it all made sense, and I could see reasons in the Bible and reasons in Quran and all that. And it was kind of one of those, we need to talk about Kevin kind of things, and people kind of worrying about where I was headed. One of the early experiences of that, and there have been many more since. And later similar things happened with other religious heritages and texts. And I've kind of always had a love for texts. Some of that comes out of my love for poetry and literature, and music and songwriting. And then some of it comes out of my early experiences with the texts of my own tradition. So I've just been drawn to the texts, Quran, Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, teachings of the Buddha, Lao Tzu, and others. And I just love that. I love digging into languages and digging out things and looking for things. So for me, those have been what some would call probably disruptive. They've certainly shifted my worldview, et cetera. But for me, they've been very positive things, except when I'm in a more conservative, traditional Christian setting. And then it tends to create painful disruptions. And for me, getting back to, Stephen, some of your mention of psychological and emotional factors, for me and my personality, which is that I really want people to like me, there's a disruptive, uncomfortable struggle inside of me about how much to share. How much do I say? And I'm paying attention to whether people are like to their body language and their voices, like, oh, okay, they're not liking this, and I'll
You have
pull
like
back.
shortened versions of stories where you're like,
I guess
you get to
sort
point,
of,
this point in the plot, let's see how you're responding.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
kind of like those talk lists that call centers have, where if they say yes, go here. If they say no, go here.
Read body language. They're not into this. Okay.
Not consciously, but I'm a kind of intuitive person, and I would just sort of like, okay, let's shift here, or I would use language that made them feel better, and later I would think, oh man, I feel slimy.
You didn't say it was actually true.
Exactly. So anyway, that's some of my journey.
Well, I think that's helpful in showing some of the dynamics of that kind of disruption. It's not even deconstruction, because you weren't like frustrated with your own faith experience and trying to
it wasn't
things
that
down.
kind of deconstruction
it wasn't
that people experience today. Yeah,
it wasn't out of religious trauma,
right? Right.
Specifically, what really strikes me in that is that it wasn't even just about, oh, Kevin's doing XYZ, he's believing XYZ. It's literally not an openness to your religious experience itself. Like that there's this point of like, oh, he said he had the same experience with the Quran that he did with the Bible. That can't be true.
Right.
Literally just not listening
Yeah.
to a spiritual account of what you experienced. Now, they might have a different interpretation than you did of what was happening in that moment, but it sounds like the experience itself upset them.
Yeah.
Which is not the posture that you could ever begin to practice a mutuality of really believing that someone else has a genuine religious experience or spiritual experience that they're describing.
Yeah.
And if you're shut down to that, you're shut down to other people, and you're shut down to what it means to be human and spiritual.
Yeah. That's great insight. Maybe that's why mutualism became such an important idea to me.
Probably. I mean, you
for my own healing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That segues directly. I don't know if you were done, but that segues directly into my disruption, which was when I finally had freedom from those kinds of constraints. It was both scary and exhilarating, and freeing to be in a space that didn't have people looking over your shoulder like, yep, you're saying the wrong thing, or you're going in the wrong direction, or you're whatever that might be. And so that was a few years ago at this point, or even before that in my prior employment, there were spaces that I was beginning to ask all sorts of things. And it's like I spent this number of years in a more evangelical Christian space where there were things that I received from it, things that I value, to try to not just like throw it all under a bus. There really were. But I was freed up from that and have no intention of going back into that kind of space, though I can appreciate people coming from there and how they might have genuine spiritual journeys. As a spiritual director, I need to be open to all of that. It's my understanding of mystery certainly still includes that spiritual journey in that context too. But I think for me, it allowed me to... Well, one, the most clear thing was it really allowed me to start doing things like taking meditation training and other things that have begun to, and this is getting into where am I at now, but really begin to integrate Buddhist insight and wisdom and ways of seeing with a more panentheist view that really gels well together for me. And so I think that disruption, while painful at first, of needing to get out of a space that was no longer working and fitting, I'm really glad I did it. And it for me was one where in the process kind of felt like there was an inner invitation that I understood as coming from the divine I'm elsewhere too. Like you can, and so it wasn't like this rupture of my own lived experience in a spiritual sense. It was just continuing and receiving from new places, without needing to throw out everything, but also freedom to throw out plenty that I didn't.
Yeah. Was it kind of like it felt like the natural progression of what the journey you'd been on, almost that kind of thing?
Yeah, it felt like
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
It felt like a reclaiming where I'd go back and be like, oh yeah, I was like that when I was a high schooler. Like, oh yeah, I was like that when I was a college student. The only time I haven't been like that was when I had to keep that shut.
Right.
That's the only time in my life I haven't been like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Curious and able to say, no, I don't think that anymore.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that doesn't make sense to me.
So it was restorative as well as progressive. Right. Yeah.
But it wasn't a losing of something or shutting down of my whole spiritual life in the process. It was more just an opening up to receive some new treasures too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that does segue nicely actually into where are we at now? How do we, and however we want to share that, including like what we're still uncertain about and all that kind of stuff has got to be part of it if we're going to be honest. And again, to disrupt our order a little bit, I'll go first this time, and that'll just kind of mix things up a bit. But what we want to talk about is our current way of seeing mystery and connecting with mystery. So, if there's not just the conceptual sides of this, perhaps, but what do we do these days to connect? How does that work for us, and where are we struggling with that? Questions we still have, uncertainties we still have. And it may get us onto questions too of how we see and understand the divine or not divine, and what mystery is, and all that kind of thing. So, and I think for me, I think where I'd like to start with that is there's sort of two aspects I want to touch on, and we all three of us have, we could probably all do multiple episodes just on our own ways of seeing right now. So I'll try to keep this brief, but I'll just touch on two. And I think one of those is that where I'm currently at is that I see connection with mystery sort of through four frames. We talk about it in Table Collective. I've done a lot of thinking about this in my own spiritual life and artistic life. But so I think I connect with mystery, capital M, when I connect with myself. I connect with mystery when I connect deeply with others. I connect with mystery when I'm connecting deeply with nature and the cosmos. I connect deeply with mystery when I'm connecting with my understanding of the divine. Or even to phrase it differently, I think I'm always connected with all those things, or with mystery in all those things. My practice of it and the intentionality about connecting these days has really centered more and more on seeking to do that with empathy and compassion, and other aspects that Buddha taught, sympathetic joy and equanimity. But I'll just touch on those things. So for me, it's a much more holistic thing than it used to be, but also I think my understanding of the divine is something I should comment on here, and because I actually, as a good mutualist and interspiritual person, think all the theisms have something to tell us. So monotheism, there's one God. Polytheism, there's many. Pantheism, everything is God. Atheism, nothing is God. All those things, and there's all sorts of, panentheism is another iteration, another theism. There's all sorts of different, henotheism. There's all sorts of theisms. I think they actually all have something to say to us. And I said this once in a Christian setting, and somebody was like, how can atheism have something to say to us? And I'm like, well, first, experientially, don't we all at times feel like there isn't a God, right? And the other is, for those of us who really pursue union, if Stephen and I ever melded, Stephen, in my experience, would no longer exist, right? In some versions of that, right? Some ways of imagining. So if I'm really in union with God, is God out there? And if God's not out there, does God exist? And what does exist mean? And all those kinds of things. So I actually think atheism is something that we can learn from and as a concept play with. And some of that is because I don't see any of those theisms, including monotheism, as sort of substantive descriptions of reality. I think they're all ways of trying to touch it and express what we're touching. I think the word that best fits me nowadays is panentheism, but I like to reverse it and say theos in panta, meaning that, so panentheism is everything in the divine. If you flip it around, it's the divine in everything, and I think those are both true. And experientially, those can feel a lot like pantheism, monotheism, and all the other isms and theism. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm still very much, I describe myself as a Jesus follower, but what that means is a recognition too that, just as he turned over the tables in the temple, he's got a lot of tables he wants to turn over in the Christianity that has claimed his name. And so following him doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a practicing Christian. I don't go to church, but I have a lot of community with other people on spiritual journeys. I meditate on the scriptures still, but I meditate on all sorts of sacred texts. But I would say I'm a Jesus follower. I just sometimes describe myself as a Buddha meditator because Jesus actually doesn't give us a lot of guidance about how to meditate. He gave us sort of one prayer and then said, don't use a lot of words and trust. Okay. But after I've used that prayer a lot, what do I do? And Buddha actually is very extensive, really wise guidance on things like that. So I call myself a Buddha meditator, and I'm shaped by all these other heritages and traditions, and I want to be. And in my lived experience and in text, and also in relationship with other people's lived experiences. So that's kind of where I'm at. And that probably will raise a lot of questions for some of my friends who will hear this in the future. But that's me. So I don't have a number for either of you who's number 2 or 3, but Stephen, Naz, who wants to take it up?
You ready?
I can go. Yeah.
Okay.
I started to think about this in preparation in terms of revisiting what was my posture when I was younger, particularly around uncertainty, around the way I related to my theology as a way of getting security. And I think particularly more recently, the last few years at least, as a minimum, to be a spiritual director, I have to be comfortable with mystery, because the further you go on a spiritual journey with someone, even the things that any tradition would say, this is how it is, this is the truth, and I'm teaching you this. But I'm speaking obviously most specifically from Christian experience. Every single one of those claims is a mystery. The way a Christian view of Trinity, cool. You have some descriptions, great. But that took hundreds of years, and it's still a mystery. The way that Jesus is described, okay, cool. I'm glad that makes sense to you, but those are words on paper. The actual mystery of humanity and divinity, you're not solving that by having a nice set of words. Same goes for anything else. And so for me, I think there's both how I'm with other people, and then for myself, of it's been several years of just this kind of refrain that I've used of I'm in you and you are in me, and there's purposefully no pronoun or no gendering of the pronoun there.
Right.
It's and it's intentionally almost a non-dual, not one but not two, and that's weird. What am I saying about what it means to be human? And so I think that's true the further you go into the contemplative streams of many traditions, of the line between reality and the individual gets blurred, whether that reality is named God or is primordial consciousness or something else. That distinction is helpful in a conventional sense to use Buddhist framing of it. There's a conventional level, and then there's the ultimate reality of what it is, which would be emptiness, which is just that things don't exist separately or inherently. And so that, to me, just opens up a whole colorful overflow of the interplay of things that is always stranger than just what the surface conventional naming, putting labels on things says it is.
Yeah.
So I think I'm getting a lot more comfortable with it. And then on the side of how do I handle uncertainty and risk in life? My primary teacher of late has been being a foster resource parent, honestly. My experience of that has kind of coincided with a set of Buddhist practice called Lojong mind transformation, which is really about forming your heart to exchange cherishing yourself for cherishing others. Essentially just not thinking about your own wants and desires, because if you're equanimous, you're not having that kind of grasping, and it also frees you from suffering. And so my experience as being a foster parent has been one where the second I'm grasping it, I want this kid to be mine, who's definitely not. Suffering enters in, and I'm also loving conditionally. I'm loving in like, I want whatever picture of my family life or whatever picture of our future that we're wanting. And what I've learned through this, and this, I'm not good at this yet, but I've seen shift in 6 months, where more and more I was able to just be present each day and be like, these are the good days. Wherever this goes, this moment right now is good. And I'm able to love without grasping to want to be with this child beyond this moment. Here I am. And that's kind of coincided with both that meditation practice of formation, but also seeing the connection between that and bodhicitta, the heart of enlightenment, with when I look at the Sermon on the Mount, what Jesus describes is the heart of God here too, of loving enemies, loving everyone, loving without this sense of possession. It's a freely given, self-giving love. And so that all enters back into my earlier risk aversion in the sense that I've begun to have to let go of like, it's going to go whatever way I want, or that God's for me specifically. No, like it's the path I'm on is one of self-emptying. And I don't think that's unique to the Christian path. I think that's just what the depth of spirituality takes you to, is this letting go of yourself, letting go of your own self-importance and your ego. There's different practices and techniques for that, but I actually find the Buddhist ones more helpful than most Christian things, because there aren't too many Christian practices, at least I say that there's exceptions and depends on the tradition, but a lot of traditions don't actually have anything to help you take on that heart posture. There's a lot of talk and not a lot of formation, and you see it in the pastors too. And so, I think I'm getting comfortable with letting life be the strange unfolding roller coaster that it is, and learning to not get myself entangled in ways that cause myself a lot of pain. So
that's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's been good.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah. Niles, what would you like to share today?
I want to say so much. I have so many stories to share, but I'll try and maybe talk about a few. Where am I at now? I feel like I have to go back and talk about seminary.
I was going to ask you.
I was assuming that was going to come up at some point.
So life circumstances brought me to seminary in That's actually how I came to Southern California, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do after college with an anthropology degree. There's more to the story that I can't share right now because it would take a long time. But I found myself at Claremont School of Theology, and the appeal for me to go to seminary was that I was in the interreligious studies program. So I was going to be in a mixed environment. And in a way, I feel like I unknowingly was like bringing myself back to that early syncretic type of
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Even though I feel like everything is syncretic. But anyway, the joke is that I went in confused and I came out agnostic in the best possible way. So there was, after college, all of these questions swirling in my head, my identity. And I think I was seeking answers. So I went to seminary trying to seek answers. And I don't know if it's really religious trauma that, like, I think I had more gender trauma.
That makes sense.
With patriarchal interpretations of a lot of things and trying to not getting great answers. And that seemed to be the least, in my experience, and I've dabbled in a lot of religious traditions. I've taken part in a lot of different types of rituals, but that gender aspect seemed kind of consistent across the board, across traditions, also in non-traditional, non-religious households too, because I also have a Bangladeshi friend who grew up in an atheist household.
It's a pretty human thing. There's a gender issue going on.
Who grew up in an atheist household, very pro-science, educated, but man, she could not escape the gender stuff either.
Wow. Yeah.
So I have all these questions about gender. Why is there such a double standard? Things like that. So I went into seminary with mainly trying to get answers to that. And it's so funny because it was in a Islamic law class, Islamic jurisprudence class, where I kind of became agnostic.
Yeah.
Of all classes, I would not guess the jurisprudence class would be it.
Yeah. That's when I realized, oh, the men are making things up.
Okay.
And if they can do it, then I can make religion whatever I want it to be. So I found a lot of empowerment through that class and just the ridiculousness that I was the men I was surrounded by.
Yeah.
What did you choose to make it be for yourself then? I feel like I can make it whatever I want.
I went back. I think right now I call myself feministly, agnostically syncretic.
Yeah, I like that. So feministly, agnostically syncretic. Yep.
Yeah. I'm open to everything.
Yeah.
I feel like I can't, for me, I have a brown body. I have I present, very feminine. So I feel like I can't reject those identities either because I'm always going to be perceived a certain way.
Right.
So for me, it's just being okay with contradictions right now.
Yeah.
And very similar to you, I think just being open and being present and being okay with questions and being curious. I think I try to lead my life with curiosity.
Well, and that's a posture that allows a lot of compassion for the people around you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. We've talked about your seminary stuff a couple of times, but this gave another sort of nuance and dimension to it that I really appreciate. Yeah. Thank you. Well, so we actually covered quite a bit today, although there's a lot more questions that I think we'd all love to explore. So we'll be giving that some thought to all our listeners and viewers out there. We'll continue to think about it, which reminds me, for those of you who are listening or watching, I would hope that this has stirred up questions, memories, all sorts of things for yourself. And we would love to carry on this conversation in the comments in YouTube. That's one of the things that I love about it. And I would love to see us three even maybe do that. That could be an interesting way to carry on some of the conversation, like, oh, I wish I had brought this up, or I meant to say this, or I wanted to ask Naz about this or something. And obviously you can choose not to respond if you want, but I think that'd be a really interesting thing. I think this particular episode, all our episodes, I think have material like that. But this one, I think we're just scratching the surface.
We were just leaving massive gaps. And
yes, exactly.
Our explanations of where we're at now are the surface of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Future episodes, we plan to be welcoming in some guests and that sort of thing. We'll keep everybody apprised of how that goes. But I really think this is surfacing a lot of things. And particularly, I want us to continue to think how both those of us who are participating in the conversation, those of you listening, watching, how this journey of interconnection with mystery, the divine, however we understand that, and particularly perhaps that fourfold thing, which we talk about a lot in Table Collective about ourselves and others and nature, cosmos, and mystery and the divine, how that has shaped not just what we refer to as our spiritual lives and categorize often with religious traditions, but how that has shaped what we call our creative life. And the impact of that, I think that'd be a really interesting thing. If we had another hour today, I'd love to say, okay, so Stephen, Naz, how has all that shaped who you are creatively and what you choose to express, what you notice, your sense of inspiration, all those sorts of things. But we won't do that today in this episode, but that may be something we come back to in the future. And I would encourage our listeners and audience to do that as well. So again, hit us up in the comments and subscribe, tell others about it. And we look forward to seeing each other and you next time.